Hi, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to another Thursday night with Rabbi Juan, who has, want to let everyone know, signed a contract to do these into perpetuity. He doesn't know it yet, but no, we're very thankful for what he's doing for us on Thursdays. What is it, the second Thursday it is, right? Yeah, of the month. So anyhow, he's been doing a great series on Shabbat, and that's going to continue tonight. And I'm glad you're here, and we will be recording this. So it'll be posted in the group, and you can share it with friends. So I think if you want, you can go ahead and share your screen if you're not already doing that.
Okay, just give me a second here. I was all ready to share it, and then the file somehow disappeared. Hold on. So I've got the file open. Let's see, presentation mode. All right, can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight. I do enjoy these, and I appreciate the time that everybody puts into this. I feel a little bit like Nancy Pelosi today. It's been quite some time since I've taught on this particular topic. So I feel like in order to find out what's in the class, I have to teach the class first. That's just a joke. Sorry about that. But let's talk about the laws of Shabbat, because one of the things that I have noted, I think, in the past is that in interacting with people, whether it's people that come to the Havara in the Dallas area, or people online, or just different communities, one of the things that I find is that many people put a tremendous amount of importance on the theoretical, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes I find the practical aspect lacking. And I think that this is something critical because, right now we live in a day and age, of course, everybody knows the political situation, the military situation in the Ukraine and Russia. And it reminds me of something that Rabbi Jacob Neusner said. He said that in the midst of the aftermath of the Bar Kokhba rebellion in the first few decades of the second century, there was really nothing that Israel could do on a political level. There was one thing that they could do, and that was they could be holy. And I think that as much as we are able to, politically and freedom and so forth, that's wonderful. We're very privileged despite all the challenges that we have to live in this day and age. But I think the centrality of what I'm trying to say is that holiness, or kedusha, is something that we do have power within ourselves to aspire to and to keep. And the laws of Shabbat are a critical aspect of that. So what we want to do is we want to look at the practical aspects. We're not going to be able to go through very much because there's so much. But I wanted to give you sort of an insight into some of the fundamental issues that you should consider, and hopefully that you will continue to learn in the future. So let's look at a comment that was made by Rabbi Yehonatan Schutz. He was a Polish rabbi, and I believe that he was the chief rabbi of Prague in the Czech Republic. And he states the following. He says, one who does not thoroughly study the laws of Shabbat 3 or 4 times cannot avoid desecrating Shabbat, either with a Torah violation or a rabbinic violation. It is praiseworthy to constantly study the laws. So let me begin by stating that I believe that he's right. The laws of Shabbat in a traditional sense, in a classical sense, are very, very complicated. They're not easy. And I know that many times that can become, the gating point for people. They can't sort of overcome the complexity of the laws. It becomes very overwhelming and discouraging. And so sometimes they focus in on more the theoretical aspects than the practical aspects. But I would encourage you that it has to be something that is eased into. It has to be repetitive. You have to add to it. You have to review. And then you have to make it part of your experience and your personal trek. It has to be something that becomes ingrained within you. And it's not a race, but I think it should be a challenge, and it's something that you should incorporate. And one thing that we tell people in our Havara is that when they're going through Giur, or they're studying, maybe they didn't grow up observant or something like that, we have a long list of materials that we give them, and you look at them and they're very complex and very hard. And I tell the people, they're not expecting you to sort of retain all this information, but I want you to be exposed to it, because that small percentage that you'll retain will be the building block on which you can add other learning to, and of course, ultimately observance. So let's continue. Now, this is from the Sifat Emet, and he says, we learn that tarnish and blemishes must be removed from metal utensils that are to be rendered kosher from the word only in the verse, only the gold and silver. That's from the book of Numbers, chapter 31:22. Similarly, only in only keep my Shabbatot and Shemot 31:13 teaches one that we must be free. We must free himself of his tarnish and blemishes before entering the sanctity of Shabbat. And one of the elements of this, which I think is important, is that we have to sort of understand that there is a difference in time. As Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel stressed, Shabbat is that oasis of time. We enter into a different dimension. When we looked at some of the Zemirot for Shabbat, what did they say? They said, Me'en olam haba, a taste of the world to come. So in order to do that, we have to enter and accept a new mindset. And part of that is understanding the laws of Shabbat, because if it's a different time frame, if it's a different dimension, if you will, if we believe, or if we, however we understand it, if an additional soul, if our souls are enlarged in some way to experience the beauty of Shabbat, there have to be physical things that we do to prepare for that and to observe, to add to that holiness. So this is the idea that we're trying to communicate here. Now, what we are going to be doing is we're going to be spending a lot of time on this concept of melacha, or malacha, as people sometimes say. And the basis for this is ultimately Exodus 29, and it says, V'yom hashevi'i Shabbat l'Adonai Elohecha, lo ta'aseh chol melacha, ata uvincha ubetecha, avdecha ve'amatcha, uvchemtecha begercha asher bisharecha. And this is the key word here, chol melacha. But the seventh day is a Sabbath unto the Lord thy God. Shabbat Adonai Elohecha. We've run across that concept before. In it thou shalt not do any manner of work. Lo ta'aseh. We will not do chol melacha, all work, any kind of work. Nor mayst thou, ata, ubincha, your son or thy daughter, ubitecha, avdecha, your servant. This is inclusive, the manservant, the amatcha, the maidservant, nor uvchemtecha, the cattle, behema, nor the stranger, begercha, that is within asher bisharecha, within thy gates. Now, the critical thing that we have to understand is, or we have to ask is, what is this chol malacha? What is this any manner of work? And so this is really what we're going to focus in on. And what we're trying to do is we're going to look at examples of this to understand the thinking process of the rabbis, and of course of the Tanakh itself, of the Hebrew Bible, because it assumes this already. We don't have it necessarily articulated the same way until the rabbinic period, but the concepts are there, and the Bible itself reflects this idea. Let's continue. One of the key things, if we look at Exodus chapter 35, we're not going to look at it specifically, but I'm just giving you the reference. We want to look at the juxtaposition of the laws of Shabbat and the construction of the Mishkan. The Mishkan is being constructed and all the different elements that go into it. Think about everything that went into it. They had lumber, they had silver, they had gold, they had to weave, they had to dye, dye, in terms of coloring. They had to do all these things. They had to just think about all the processes that went into making each individual thing from its origin. We take it for granted, right? We live in the 21st century. We don't think about how things are made. But the process of taking wool and then, separating it from the animal, and then all the process of smoothing it out, of making it into yarn, thread, of dyeing it, all the things that are involved are part of the construction of the Mishkan. And interestingly, in the midst of that, the laws of Shabbat are mentioned very briefly. And this is the basis on which the rabbis say, these are the laws of Shabbat. Now, there's a mistake here. It should be 39 categories of work. I thought I had fixed that. But if we look at the Bavli, if we look at the Babylonian Talmud in Shabbat 97b, there's a discussion of the 39 categories of work. We call them the Avot Melachot. So 39, not 30. And the Avot Melachot, Avot, we think about as fathers. Melachot are the laws. And so what happens is there are these parent categories, and then they have subcategories. This is why they're called Avot Melachot, because it's not just 39 categories. There are differences, there's subcategories that we have to look at. So that's why it's extremely expansive, and it's not simple. And again, it's something that people want to take on a very simple and step-by-step basis, beginning with some big ones and then sort of continuing on. Now let's look very quickly at some biblical text, just to get an idea of some key things here. And this is from Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 21 and 22. Kor Amar Adonai Hishmaru benafshotechem ve'al tisu. Masab beyon haShabbat vechabetam b'sha'arei Yerushalayim. Ve'lo chotzi'u masa mibatechem beyon haShabbat ve'chol melacha lo ta'asu. Ve'ki dashtem et yom haShabbat ke'asher tziviti et avotechem. Thus says the Lord, take heed for the sake of your souls. Bear no burden on the Sabbath, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem. Neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day, neither do ye any work, but hallow ye the Sabbath day, as I commanded your fathers. So here we have a reference to carrying on Shabbat. Ve'al tisu masa beyon haShabbat. It's something that we really didn't encounter before. We could argue that the individual who's picking up sticks on Shabbat in Exodus is one example, but we don't have it articulated the same way. Here it's quite clear that this is a burden that's being carried on Shabbat. And then, of course, it refers again to Vechol Melacha, the passage that we have seen. So this is very important. Now let's look at another biblical passage here. I didn't provide the Hebrew just because of the spacing. Nehemiah 13, 15 through 22. In those days I saw in Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath. Number one, bringing in heaps of corn and lading asses therewith. Number two, also wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens. Number three, when they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I forewarned them in the day wherein they sold victuals. There dwelt a men of Tyre also therein, who brought in fish and all manner of ware, and sold them on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said to them, what evil is this that you do, and profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers thus, and did not our God bring all this evil upon us and upon the city? Yet ye bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the doors should be shut, and commanded that they should not be opened until after the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I over the gates, that there should be no burden brought in on the Sabbath day. So the merchants and sellers of all kinds of ware lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. Then I forewarned them, and I said unto them, why lodge ye about the wall? If ye do again, I will lay hands on you. From that time forth came they no more on the Sabbath. Of course, this is Nehemiah, who has been given the responsibility of building the wall. He's a governor for the Persians, and so he has imperial authority to institute and to enforce Torah law. And we see all these things that are enumerated that, of course, the Torah itself in the Torah Shabbat, the written Torah, does not elaborate on. And so we know that, of course, by the exilic period or the post-exilic period, this is something that is already in play. It's already known, it's already assumed. And Nehemiah actually uses this as a justification for the punishment that has befallen Israel. So it's very important to look at. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get really practical. We're going to look at a series of these because I think, as I said, the practicality is something very important. Now, we're not going to get into all the derivatives of this. We just want to go here and look at some of these things. And I think you'll be quite interested in some of these things. So the first one that we have is Zariah. Zariah is essentially like seeding. Think about Zeraim. In the Talmud, there is one section that is called Zera'im. It has everything to do with growing, with planting. And so the principle, the malacha or the melacha, is causing the growth of a plant. Now that seems simple enough, right? But the problem is there are other things related to that. Now, why would this be considered a melacha as derived from the biblical text? Remember, we talked about the construction of the Mishkan and the laws of Shabbat. Well, the rabbis provide us with the understanding. The frame of the Mishkan, remember, there's all the elements that go in. There's the wood and planks, and then they're covered, and then there's the curtains and all the things that go into that. The frame of the Mishkan was covered with sheets made from animal skins. Now, what's interesting about that? The skins were dyed various colors. The dyes were derived from what? From plants. This planting is the Mishkan source for this melacha. So here you sort of see, like, indirectly how these things are all connected to each other. The reason that we can't plant is because it was indirectly used in the process of building the Mishkan. So the Av Melacha, the father, the principal category was related to sowing seeds, because that's ultimately the basis for the plants to grow, from which we can get the dye, from which we can make the fur conform to the particular color that they wanted to use in the Mishkan. Let's continue. So here we have an example. You have an individual who is what? They're tilling the ground, they're digging. So now we sort of take it a step further. It's not simply planting, because some of us are going to say, well, I'm not a farmer, I'm not a gardener, I don't plant. But it's not just that simple issue of planting a physical plant. It's everything that is related to that process. So if you are digging, let's say that you have your child and they're digging outside on Shabbat, what's the problem with that? Well, they're cultivating the soil unintentionally, but they're cultivating it for what? What will happen? Potentially seeds will fall and something will grow. Now let's look at how extensive this. We're still on Zariah. This is just one, just to show you how extensive this is. Now there are 4 actions considered similar to sowing seeds. The first, and this, when I say MT, this is the Mishneh Torah. This is from the Rambam, the Rabbi Moses ben Maimon. And you can find them in other sources, but I'm providing you with one key text. And for simplicity, I'm not quoting each one of these, because we'd be sort of bogged down with just going through the sources. We want to summarize. Planting a seedling or sapling. So that's pretty clear, right? You have a little flower, you have a little plant, physically you want to do that. So we know that that's pretty obvious. Well, what about if you're going to prune? Because pruning isn't planting, right? I mean, in our way of thinking, I'm not a gardener, but it doesn't seem to be planting. But actually, pruning is something that helps a plant grow, right? You take the twigs or whatever it is, the branches that are weak, maybe they're not developing correctly, you prune them, the tree sort of continues to grow, the plant continues to grow, maybe it's been eaten by bugs or something like that. So that actually enhances the growth. And the Rambam says this is prohibited. Well, what about another one? What about grafting? Again, we don't think about grafting as planting, but what we're doing is we're taking one part, a branch, and then we're fixating it, or we're joining it onto another. The same thing with layering, different things that are done in the cultivation of plants. And so these things are actions that are considered similar to sowing seeds. So now we have, expanded the category of Zariah. Now, what are the Toladot? The Toladot, we think about them as, in the Torah, you have the Toldot. These are the generations, or the descendants. You can think about it in that sense. These are the things that are even further extrapolations of the origin. So, for example, we have these specific things, right? Planting, pruning, grafting, layering. The Toladot are any action that improves a plant, anything that improves the fruit, anything that prevents harm to vegetative growth. So, for example, what's a perfect example? Even here in Texas, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, our temperature was like 31 degrees. It's March, and that's not typical. So if I were to go out on Shabbat and we have a fig tree that we're trying to grow, and I were to take plastic and I would, cover it up, or whatever people use to protect trees and saplings, whatever they're called. My wife is the grower. I'm not the grower. But if we were to do that on Shabbat because we're protecting it, what are we doing? We're preventing harm to vegetative growth. And so we're cultivating, in essence, by protecting it. We don't want to interfere in the process. Now, of course, if I did that before Shabbat, that would be perfectly fine. But doing that actively on Shabbat is the problem. Now, one of the things that I run into, as you probably all know, I have 3 boys. I have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And so when we have services on Shabbat, well, what are they going to do? Sometimes they stay for the service, part of it. Then they go outside and they come back in. They go outside and play. And what's the temptation? Well, the temptation, of course, is to find a tool, a dig, or a stick or something, and just start digging, right? They're boys, they're going to do something. And the problem with that is there's many issues with that. But one of the problems, as I mentioned in the beginning, is that they are indirectly cultivating the ground. And so, of course, in our case, we're trying to tell them, we don't do that on Shabbat. You can do that after. You want to plant a tree, you can do that after Shabbat. So these are the kinds of things that you can see how expansive this is. And it's just one category of melacha. All right, so now we're not even done yet. We're still on Zariah. So these are the halachic implications of this. This is how we apply it. So just imagine, we would do this 39 times, and I actually did a course on this. So the first one would be, we should not toss seeds or pits of fruits and vegetables. So let's say that I'm outside. It's Shabbat. I'm taking a walk, and I'm eating, and then I decide to throw, the remnants of my apple seeds, whatever it is, and I throw them on the ground. Now, it's probably not likely that they're going to grow, but it is something that we should be conscious of, because if we do grow, we have just planted. And of course, in our modern society, most of us don't plant. We don't really think about farming. My wife has gotten into this of late because I'm planting and drinking in a garden. You inadvertently spill water on a sapling or something that is against the sapling or the tree or whatever it is with nutrients that it's going to use to grow. Now, again, all these perspectives are from a traditional Orthodox perspective. I'll make some comments at the end on some other perspectives, but I'm trying to give you sort of the most extreme so that you can see the spectrum, so to speak. Now, what's another category of halachic applications? This is growth. So again, it's water related. One should not wash their hands over earth, even if there are no plants growing in it. This is something that I always catch one of my sons doing. My son Yaron. My son Yaron is the very active one. He loves to go outside, and then I'll catch him, trying to turn on the spigot for the hose, and then I have to tell him to stop that. Why? Because he's going to water the ground. Now, in our particular case, or in the case of friends that we have a lot of patches that don't have grass. It's just dirt. We're trying to slowly improve that. So theoretically, it wouldn't be a problem if the water is just affecting the dirt, but it's laying a pattern down, right? We don't want to encourage the behavior, but there may be something in the dirt already, and it's just waiting for the right amount of water to come up. So that's something that we think about. One should not take a pit in a cup of water nor place a seed in a wet surface, since these can cause a seed to grow. What's a common project that kids do at home, especially probably now, in the midst of the pandemic and all these things? You used to take a bean when I was little, you'd put it in water, put some cotton in it or something, dirt, and it would grow. You don't want to do that because it's still growing. It's something that's still related to Zariah. One should not place flowers that open in water into a vase with water. One should not change the water or add water to a vase of flowers, even if the flowers do not open with water. This is because the new water improves the flowers. So again, this is just one category of one melacha. Now let's continue. We have another picture, and again, we're only going to do a few of these because, as you can see, one takes quite a bit of time. But that's the intent. We want to show you how expansive this is. And I would say, listen, some of these things you probably already doing. I don't think most people are planting on Shabbat. Most of you are probably not doing that. But let's say that you add one prohibition. Oh, I had some flowers. I'm not going to add water to it. You just kept another aspect of Shabbat. You just beautified Shabbat. you've added an additional layer to observance. And the idea is to be conscious that everything that we do has ramifications. Even the smallest thing that we do. None of us think about eating an apple and the seeds, are thrown outside, or we've let you to spit it out, whatever you do, and then it has an impact on the ground. In the same way, everything that we do in our life has an impact. Even the smallest gestures, even the words that we think are not important, they often have ramifications that we do not realize. And I think in many ways, all of these things are intended to train us to be cognizant of what we do and how we do it and when we do it. Now let's continue. This is the principle of Kharisha. And what is this is preparing the earth for planting. So we're still on the planting phase, but we're looking at a different aspect of that. Now, why is this one of the melachot? Because the dye used for the skins that covered the Mishkan were used from vegetables, so not just plants. So we're almost like refining the process, the definition, and plowing is the Mishkan source for the melacha. So remember, in the previous one, we were doing seeds. This one is plowing, so that would actually be more appropriate to my son digging. That would be sort of the plowing, but it's still part of that idea of cultivating something. Now, the Av Melacha, the principal one, the first layer, is plowing a plantable field. So plowing, tilling, cultivating, hoeing, any digging for the purpose of planting seeds. We find this in the Mishnah Torah on Shabbat 7.2. And this includes plowing with an animal. It also includes attaching the needed tools to the animal. So you can see now that it's just not going outside with a plow or with a tractor. It's also everything that is related to that process, even if you're not going to do it. So let's say that you are going to prepare. Let's say that on Sunday you're a farmer and you're going to plow your field. Well, what about if you say, I'm not gonna break Shabbat, I'm not going to plow, but I'm going to get all the harnesses and all the things that are needed, and I'm going to put them on the animal just to get ready. So the principle, halachically, is that you shouldn't be doing that because you're preparing this process before on Shabbat, and it's related to the melacha of Kharisha, of planting, of plowing. So this is something important. Sometimes many of these prohibitions are not like the first tier. They're sort of, waves that come at different levels, and then but they're all related back to the source. So just something to think about. All right, so let's look at the toladot or the tolados. These are the child categories, if you want to think about them. Removing sticks and stones from a field, breaking up clumps of earth, manuring a field, whether by pouring manure by hand on a field, bringing animals into the field with the intention that they manure the field, digging irrigation channels for trees and plants. This also includes digging, and a channel of waters, right? That you got obscured there. But you can see how important this was, especially in the Middle East, especially in a society like in Babylon and other places where irrigation ditches and channels were extremely important. So, but if you think about it, in today's world, we have the same problem, right? If you're a homesteader, if you're going to a garden, if you're a farmer, all these things are critical, and we just don't think about them in our modern society. All right, so let's go a little bit further. So we're going to rub the ground. A person should not rub his or her shoe on unpaved ground. Why? Because the Rama, is Rabbi Moses Isserles. Rabbi Moses Isserles was a rabbi from Krakow. I was fortunate to visit Krakow many years ago twice. And the Rema wrote something called the Mappa. The Mappa is like a tablecloth. And the reason he called his writing the tablecloth is because the Rabbi Joseph Caro, the Maran, wrote, or the Mechaber wrote the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch is the prepared table. And the Rema put the tablecloth on the table because what he did is he said, listen, this is great stuff, but we live in the lands of Ashkenaz, and we need to adapt the Shulchan Aruch with appropriate perspectives for Ashkenazim. And so he wrote basically his annotations, his comments on that. And he states the following. He says, a person should not rub his or her shoe on unpaved ground, playing marbles on unpaved ground. It's also a mini form of plowing. I know it seems like insignificant, but again, we're looking at principles here. We're looking at what is trying to be established here. Cleaning the yard. A person should not sweep unpaved ground. This is from the Shulchan Aruch. Again, we're using a broom. And if you have have like a lot of dirt like we do, that could easily happen. Cleaning the house. One may sweep inside the house and other paved areas, but a soft bristled broom should be used to avoid breaking the straw, which actually violates the prohibition on breaking the utensil. That's actually another melacha. And what you're going to find as you study these, you're going to find that one is often related to another. So if you keep one, you wind up sometimes keeping many. And that's something that's important. And again, that's from the Shulchan Aruch as well. Now, technically, washing the floor should not be done in the house as a means to prevent washing an unpaved floor. You could argue that there's more laxity there, but I'm just giving you the technical level, if you will. Let's continue. Sirah, principle of, what's the principle of malacha? Pulling out a plant or fruit from its place of growth. This is like hakatzir, the harvest. It's harvesting. Now, the dyes that were used for skins that covered the Mishkan were derived, and we could say the same thing from the material itself, the wool, all those things, or the linen, whatever was used, were derived from vegetables. The plants used for making the dyes had to be taken from the ground. So cutting a plant or fruit from its place of origin using a sickle or any tool used to remove it from the original place of growth. So again, we see the basis in the Mishkan. What are the child categories, if you want to think about the Torah that way? Shaking a tree to make its fruit fall. You have an apple tree, you have a fig tree. We have a pear tree. We used to have a peach tree. The peach tree died. We're trying to grow a fig tree. So just imagine my boys are out there. They see a beautiful fig or a beautiful peach or a pear, and there's going to be that temptation to pull it. And what's the problem? Well, it's a violation of ketzirah, cutting by hand or other means of a plant or fruit from its growth, from its place of growth. This is found in the Mishneh Torah, and it's found in something called the Mishnah Berurah, which is another halachic code that is used by many Ashkenazim, and many of you are familiar with the Chofetz Chaim. So he is the one that compiled that. It's I would say probably the strictest in many ways, not necessarily in all things, but certainly in many ways. Taking a flower pot, that has a hole at the bottom, away from a place in which raw nourishment and pitting it down where it cannot do so. So anything that removes it, let's have a hole at the bottom, it's already making contact with the ground. So it's almost like you're separating it from its source. It's a type of harvesting. All right, and I apologize for this mistake here. A little bit off on the centering. Here's an example. Removing an avocado pit from the water that has produced roots. Removing a fish from water since this is its place of growth. Taking honey from a beehive. Smelling a fruit while it is attached to a tree. Why? Because it prevents a person from being tempted to detach the fruit from the tree. Taking an already fallen fruit is forbidden to prevent a person from removing more fruit. So let's say, as often happens in our case, many pears fall from the tree. We have like a lot of them. So some of them are okay, and there's always a temptation to pick them up, but it cannot be done on Shabbat. Because let's say you pick it up and then it has, bruising, it's maybe has an insect on it, that natural tendency to say, I'll just throw that down and grab another one. Using a tree is prohibited to prevent the possibility of breaking a tree branch. This includes a hammock, right? Because we're, in essence, harvesting the tree branch if we take it off the tree. Leaning on a tree, that should be not learning, but leaning on the tree with his or her full weight is prohibited if the tree is small and may lean. Why? Because we may damage it, we may break it. Sitting on a tree is prohibited as it is related to using a tree. And again, we don't want to do anything that might damage the tree and thereby violate the malacha of ketzirah. Walking on grass is permitted, but running on grass is not, since running may uproot grass. So it's not about the running itself. It's about the quote unquote, the harvesting of the grass. Now, again, I think you're probably thinking, why are they being so exact? Why are they being so particular? But the idea, of course, is that these things are derived from the holiness of the Mishkan. And as Nehemiah said, we were punished for violating the Shabbat. So even if you decide, this is too much for me, it's not something that I can realistically keep, or I don't want to be conscious of it, I would still encourage you to do one thing, to remember that Shabbat is holy and that all things that we do have importance in Hashem's sight. Riding an animal is prohibited because of the possibility that a branch which is used to hit or guide the animal may break. Okay, and then I think we'll do one more, and then we'll sort of open it up for questions. I just want to expose you to as much as I can. That's just, we just done a couple of them or three of them. So what do we have here? We have, heaves of different types of grain or something like that. So this is imur. This is gathering harvest or produce in one pile. The dyes, again, that were used in the Mishkan were gathered into bunches after the harvest. So gathering harvested grain or produce from its place of growth. So the toladot, one of them is pressing dried fruits such as figs together in one mass. This prohibition applies even if it is done in the home. This is found in the Mishnah Berurah. So this is sort of the stricter view. You probably can find less lenient, you find more lenient views, but again, I included that to show you. Scattered fruit, this is halachic application. Scattered fruit in a garden or field should not be gathered together, since it appears to be the place of growth. One may, however, gather fruit and vegetables that's scattered in the house, since this is not typically, where they're gathered. This is where they are not typically gathered into bundles and even a place, peanuts and other items in a bag to throw at a chatan, like a bridegroom on the Shabbat before his wedding. So there's an exception there. Now, what's interesting is that, I don't know if any of you have seen, my wife and I have been thinking about this. They have a lot of like indoor garden options where you can actually grow tomatoes. It's like a large, I don't know what to call it, like a lattice or something, but it's like an enclosed system. You can grow all types of vegetables, enough for a family, and you keep it inside. Now, just think about that. It's a really cool system if you don't have land, or you just want to go outside, or you live in an apartment or something like that. You have fresh vegetables or fruit. But just think about it from my perspective. I've got 3 boys, and the temptation that it will be for them to start picking stuff off and just start eating from it directly. So the melachot apply even to something like that. All right. And we'll do just a couple, we'll just do this one here. And then we'll stop to give you a couple more. So this is Disha, breaking the physical connection between the desired and the undesired parts of the whole. In the Mishkan, the parts of the plant were used to prepare dyes were separated from the rest of the plants. Using a utensil to separate the desired part from the undesired part. An example of this would be a garlic press to separate the usable part of the garlic from the shell. Now, let's look at the toladot, separating the desired part from the undesired part by hand, when that is the standard method of separation. Milking a cow, since that separates the milk from the cow. Squeezing water out of a cloth for the sake of that water, and squeezing by hand a utensil, olives or grapes to make oil or wine, since that separates the juice from the fruit. You can sort of see some of the complications with being a Jewish farmer, especially in the arena of cows and things of that nature. Now, let's look at some halachic applications. Green almonds. Young almonds have a green peel around the regular shell. One may not remove this peel unless it is removed along with the shell when the almond is cracked. Cracking nuts. The custom is to permit cracking nuts, although the physical connection between the desired and undesired parts is thereby broken immediately before they are eaten. The exception comes about because this is not the standard method of disha, which involves long-term storage. Nuts are also cracked one at a time. And then the last page that we'll cover, squeezing juice into a cup. It is forbidden to squeeze the juice of any fruit into an empty vessel. The prohibition applies to squeezing by hand as well. So if you're using one of those special, I don't know what it's called, but you put the lemon in, you squeeze it. It also applies to squeezing lemon, despite the fact that lemon juice is not typically drunk in an unmixed form. It is permitted to squeeze juice from a fruit directly onto food if the juice is absorbed by the solid food. It is not considered separating juice from a solid since it becomes part of another solid. It is as if a solid has been squeezed into another solid. The juice may be squeezed directly onto the food. And then this is the last one. Grapefruit may be cut in half, eaten normally, even though the juice will ultimately be squeezed. So you can, orange is fine. This is permitted since the primary goal is the entire fruit and not simply the juice. Squeezing in the mouth. Only squeezing grapes presents a Torah prohibition. Consequently, one may not hold the grape and attempt to suck out the juice without eating the grapes. In contrast, one may hold an orange and suck out the juice, because this is typically, it's a different, fruit, and this is more common, to get the juice out of the orange. Ice cubes, one may put ice cubes in his or her drink on Shabbat. This, despite the fact that the ice will melt into the liquid, this is acceptable because liquid is not considered an independent entity. All right, so we're going to stop there. I know that that's probably very different than many of you have seen. That's only 4 or so categories that we saw. You can see how easily it becomes very technical. And again, the idea here is not to overburden you. It's to help you and encourage you to make Shabbat something that is distinct. Many of you, I think, are celebrating Shabbat, by taking off from work. But in the rabbinic mind, and even in the biblical mind, work is not simply something that you get paid for. There are certain activities that are characterized as melachot, and they have specific definitions and specific categories. And even those categories can be sort of drilled down further. And many of these, as we saw, are connected to each other. And so I would encourage you, if you're celebrating Shabbat with Shalom Aleichem, if you're celebrating Shabbat with Eshet Chayil, if you're doing Kiddush, if you're doing these things, that's wonderful. That is something that you should be doing. But try to learn about one of these melachot, one of these things, and look at all the details. And instead of saying, oh my gosh, this is so complicated, so overwhelming, look at it as an opportunity to serve Hashem. What do we say in the Siddur, in the Orot Siddur? We have a section that we read. I'm going to try to remember it. It says, when Hashem desired to merit Israel with favor, he gave them many mitzvot. I'm paraphrasing, and that it said, that he gave, he made the Torah glorious. And so the idea is that Hashem is giving us opportunities to be sanctified, to be different, to be holy. And this is part of the Shabbat experience. Now, what I want to say now is that if you're coming at this obviously from a Reform background, or even in a conservative background nowadays, most of the reality is that in the Reform movement, this was never an issue because halacha was not binding. And their focus was really on what they considered to be the moral concepts of the Tanakh and of the Torah. Now, the conservative movement in years past, many decades ago, was really a halachic movement. It was very serious about Shabbat. It was very serious about halacha. In many ways, when we think about the modern Orthodox movement, that really is what conservative Judaism used to be. If you were to go into a conservative synagogue decades ago, or even not decades ago, even a couple decades maybe, you would basically see an Orthodox service. There might not be a mechitza, there may not be separate seating, but there was a commitment to Shabbat, to the liturgy, and to basic melachot, even turning off and on lights, things of that nature. Nowadays, the conservative movement has changed. And so these kinds of observances, for the most part, are really held by people who are generally more traditional or Orthodox. And of course, there are even further levels of observance within Orthodoxy. There are many different variations. One of the things that we do, that we find sort of challenging in our family, and it's nothing wrong. I mean, it's one of the kind of challenges that you want, is that we have in our Havara, we have people that are coming in from all levels of observance, which of course is what we want. But one of the challenges that we have is that sometimes when the kids go outside to play, you have another family that they don't know about the melachot, and so they don't see a problem with, for example, riding on Shabbat. Excuse me, or they don't see a problem with digging, or they don't see a problem with picking up fruit or something like that. And of course, there's no malintent, but we're trying to teach our boys. We don't do that on Shabbat. There may be things that we don't necessarily observe for certain reasons, but we're trying our best to inculcate a certain Kiddushah Shabbat. We try to take the melachot seriously, and again, I think there are sometimes certain environments and certain conditions where some of the melachot may not be practical for everybody, depending on given specific circumstances. But the idea, of course, should be to study, to learn, and to try to implement higher levels of sanctity into your Shabbat observance. And with that, I will open it up for questions or complaints, or if anybody's a farmer, maybe they could comment on some of these things, or if you're a planter, gardener. I know Milton has a lot of experience, I think, with some of these things. So Scott says, what is the prohibition would driving fall under? So driving actually falls under various categories because there are many issues involved with the combustion engine. There are other melachot as well. There's several. Now, I think that I will be honest, in the conservative movement, there was an allowance for this out of practical necessity. And I'm not telling people that they should stop driving or that they should. Ideally, if we all lived in walking distance of the synagogue, there should be no reason for us to walk. But I'm also concerned because I know people who don't live in traditional communities, and then for the sake of the mitzvah of not driving, they stay home on Shabbat. Now, theoretically, that wouldn't be a problem if they were davening every day or on a regular basis throughout the week with in a shul or a Beit Knesset or in a synagogue. But if they don't do that, and if they're isolating themselves, I'm going to tell you personally, I find that problematic because I don't think that people can survive on their own if they're isolated. So yes, the ideal should never be compromised, but in reality, you have to take it like in steps. If being part of a community is going to help your observance in the long term, then yes, I would say that it is better to drive in Shabbat and experience Shabbat at some level than to simply say, I'm not going to drive, and then you don't have any interaction with other Jews, you don't experience Shabbat, you don't grow in your observance of Shabbat, and you don't know what, as people like to say, you don't experience any Yiddishkeit, you don't experience any kind of true Jewish environment. So there's a balance there. On the other, I tell people it's a sin, but sometimes you have to prioritize sins. And I know that's heretical for many people, but I'm always very concerned about people who isolate themselves, especially people that are starting out. It has to be something that is progressive. And then if you can, live in a community, even a conservative movement, there used to be a perspective that said, you can drive in Shabbat to shul, but you shouldn't go out, you're not going to go out shopping. You're not going to go out, sightseeing, all this kind of stuff. It should be one specific purpose, and that's holy work. It's holy purposes. So I'm not telling you to do it. I'm not telling you not to do it, but I just think it's important to keep that in mind. So it says here, Veronica says, so pretty much have everything ready before Shabbat and focus on praying and studying the Torah all day. Yes, that's very good. I mean, if you preparing everything for Shabbat just enhances Shabbat even more, right? It makes it the center of the week. You should cook before, you should prepare everything before, everything that you can do. It just gives Shabbat like even a higher level of expectation and observance, and I think makes it that oasis of time that it is meant to be, because it's different, right? It's other. It's not mundane. It's not, what do we say at Havdalah? He who separates between holy and secular, between the 6th day and the 7th day, or the 6 days and the 7th day, between Israel and the nations, and it's all combined together. Let me look through the comments here. I can't stop, David says, I can't stop thinking about possible construction methods using fish. Yes, we might be tempted to eat the fish, maybe. Greenhouse, I'm not sure what that means. Adam and Eve should know that halakha avoiding smelling for. That would have been good. Yeah, maybe. I think, at least theoretically, listen, sometimes people can know all the malachot, they can know all the halachot, and sometimes they're still miserable people. They can still be jerks. They can still be full of commit an avera. But I think for many people, when you start looking at all of these malachot, they say, God, Lee, the presence of Hashem is in all these things, in the physical, right? Avodah begashmiut is the concept that is Hasidut is known for, worshiping God through corporeality. And you say, like, well, I'm just planting. No. It's sanctified. It's something, that work is set aside for something else, not on Shabbat. So even then, Hashem's dictates should be at the forefront of what we do. And Luke says, interesting, I've wondered about that for a while. I'm not sure about that. I don't know what the context was. Rabbi Gershon Apple says that the Kharisha includes the prohibition of playing sports, such as soccer, baseball. Okay. There are different perspectives on this issue because, riding a bike is considered prohibited by some and is permitted by others. So what Milton says, yes, there are differences of opinion even on the melachot and their practical application. Nobody argues about the avot melacha. It's when we get down to the halachic application and to what extent that's sort of where there's discussion, and there might be more quote unquote lenient approaches. Okay, do we have any vocal questions? Let's just have a question. If we are supposed to stay familiar with the laws of Shabbat, what text would you suggest? There is a beautiful text. Let me see if I have it at the end. I had it at the end of this huge presentation. It's like 90 slides. I don't even know if you can get this book. Oh, I don't know how that went there. Okay. What I will do is I will try to remember to post a book that has a lot of pictures, very simple, it's very practical. I'll put it in the group in the Torah's Fundamentals of Torah Judaism. There are a lot of, Archkoll and Feldheim have collections of Hilchot Shabbat, of the Laws of Shabbat. If you want to look at Hilchot Shabbat in the Mishneh Torah online, the Rambam, that's probably the simplest and the clearest. This is a debate that I have with friends oftentimes. We don't rule most normative, let me put it this way, most normative communities today do not rule by the Mishneh Torah. Mishneh Torah is one source, right, for the Shulchan Aruch, but in many ways it's very clear. They're very simple statements. It's an excellent, beautiful, especially Hebrew, very, very beautiful Hebrew. But when you get to some of the practical things, I would encourage people to look at other sources as well, to have a big picture. And again, Feldheim and Archkoll have some very good resources for that. And says Rabbi Yonatan Levi stated, we are Sephardim because we follow the rulings of the Moran. Yes, this was Shulchan Aruch, that's correct. Yes. And I'm looking at some of the comments here. And I think the Shabbat home is one. Okay, so David Rico recommended Shabbat home. That's good free info on Shabbat Chalachot. Yes, Sefaria. Yes. And again, if you find something that is has a lot of pictures, I think that really, it makes it more concrete, I think. And even some of these pictures that I showed, it's interesting to see, to envision how they lived at that time, right? I mean, Israel was an agricultural society. And of course, most of the world has been agricultural until, the 20th century, right? Most people lived on farms. We're sort of detached from that, but I think it's interesting to sort of connect with that idea. So it's just another perspective to look at. And let's see, was it prep day? All right, and all right, any other questions related to the Melachot?
Man.
All right, Toby, I don't know if you have any comments or questions, or, I mean, if you want
to. Sorry, yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I know some folks just got in. We're actually concluding here, but it is recorded and we'll be posting it very shortly. So check in the Torah Fundamentals group for that as well. And we're going to have the Zoom room open Saturday night, 9 o'clock Eastern. If you can make it, if that works for you after Shabbat is done. Saturday night, we're just going to have a room open for Purim discussion. Nothing, no structured anything. Just everybody bring the party with you, and we're just going to throw a few random topics out and talk about Purim and other things related to it. So thank you again, Rabbi Juan. I'm done. If you have anything else you wanted to add.
No, again, thank you everybody for coming, and I appreciate the opportunity. I hope again that it'll spur some interest, spur some study. Again, I know it can be overwhelming, but I think it might surprise you. You know, so many things you might already be doing, you don't even know. I think a lot of these things are, once you sort of get exposed to them, you can sort of incorporate them, a lot of them at least fairly easily. So I just encourage you on that side to continue your studies.
Okay. Well, thank you, and I hope to see some of you Saturday night. And if not, have a wonderful Purim, and we'll have announcements out for changes and other good fun stuff that we're planning on these Zoom rooms. So thank you again, Rabbi Juan. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, we'll be posting things send me a PM if I'm not sure which links those were. So if you can send me a message, or if Rabbi Juan knows, he can remind me later. I'll ask him what the links were. Sorry, I was in the broadcast. So.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.